Ciao a tutte, ciao a tutti e ben ritrovati con una nuova puntata di Work After, la newsletter e il podcast dove ci interroghiamo sul futuro del lavoro. Quest'oggi andiamo negli Stati Uniti a intervistare Gary Bolles. Gary è una vera istituzione del mondo del lavoro. Per la Singularity University si occupa di trasformazione dell'economia, dell'industria, della società e della cultura. Ha scritto un libro per capire il futuro del lavoro che si chiama The Next Rules of Work. E poi è il figlio di quel Richard Bolles che nel 1970 ha pubblicato What Color is Your Parachute? Un libro che ha venduto milioni di copie in tutto il mondo e è diventato un po' la Bibbia e l'ispirazione per tutti quelli che cercano lavoro o vogliono cambiare il proprio percorso di carriera professionale. Quest'oggi Gary sarà ospite per la prima volta in assoluto di una trasmissione italiana. Perché facciamo questa cosa e perché sto andando a prendere un ospite negli Stati Uniti? Molto semplice, perché la mia promessa per voi è portarvi il meglio di tutto quello che riguarda l'ispirazione sul futuro del lavoro e a volte questo meglio si trova al di fuori dall'Italia. Perciò mettetevi comodi e partiamo. Hi, Gary. Thanks for joining us at Work After. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. First, I have to make a disclosure. I'm a big fan of you, and all of your research and work has been such a massive inspiration for me to start my project, my newsletter and podcast project, Work After. So, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
So let's start from really the basic. So based on your experience, how would you define work in today's world? I mean, what the meaning does this word work hold for you?
So, Matteo, it's a great question, and I actually would look at it in two different ways. There's the meaning of the word work, and then what's the meaning of work for people, right? And so it's a great question with two facets. I don't intend to tell people what their own definition of work should be. My belief is that it's one of the ways we choose to channel our energies as human beings. And some people think of that as only the way that we would choose to channel our energies if we're compensated for it. Others think of it as it's hard. And there's one of the definitions of work is it's not easy. Work is work, right? And so my definition is how we tend to choose to channel our human energies. And there's a context where we're creating value, where we're creating some value, typically for somebody else. We might be drawing a picture, we might be digging a ditch, we might be creating a computer program. And if we think of that as how we channel our human energies and we create value for somebody else, that often is a context for work. Now, when it comes to the meaning of work, I'm asked all the time about the purpose of work, and purpose to some people is a little bit too high a bar, like purpose with a capital P in English. So I talk a lot about the meaning of work, and the meaning of work is very subjective for people. Some people think that the meaning comes from just feeding your family and putting a roof over their heads. And that's awesome. That's wonderful. That's actually a pretty traditional view of work. And others think that the meaning of work comes from something that you are doing that helps society, that helps other humans, that helps the planet, and is one of the reasons that you're here on the planet. So whatever gives you meaning in your work, I encourage people to understand, like, what is it that drives you? What are you most passionate about bringing into the world? And if it's having a family or simply just having a good life yourself, awesome. And if it's beyond that, if it's creating more value for more people in more ways, that's awesome too.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a great, I think, definition. Both the definitions are great. So I would continue our conversation saying that probably if the definition of work has not changed over time, it's true that the way we work has changed over time. I want to start from a great piece of you, an article that you wrote back in 2017 that is called Unbundling Work,
learning to thrive in disruptive times, where you explore basically how automation and globalization are deconstructing jobs into smaller pieces, tasks, skills, and processes. And what I like about this article is that it's about history of work. You start back the Industrial Revolution up to today's world. And what are the main stages that work faced over the years?
So, wonderful question. And so that article actually was one of a series of articles I wrote on unbundling. And the whole concept of unbundling comes from my great friend John Hagel, who used to run Deloitte's Center for the Edge. And his premise was that organizations are this bundle of functions, and that what has happened in the technology era is that a lot of those functions have sort of pulled apart, and that there's an opportunity continually when these functions all pull apart to then reassemble them in new ways. But the first step is that they get pulled apart. So the idea of unbundling work is work used to be a job, but actually if you go way back into more ancient times, the whole mindset around work is that work was a curse. Work was something that only people who were tradespeople, or people who were slaves, or people who had to do work were cursed by the gods, and people who didn't have to work as much actually had much more exalted lives. And then around the time of Martin Luther and the Reformation, there became a rhetoric that God wanted you to work and God wanted you to be successful. And so that created what is often called the Protestant work ethic. And so we shifted in the Western world into this mindset that you have to work, that work is something you must do. And this is the only way that you're really going to have a better life, is if you work. And then the Industrial Revolution changed the way that a lot of work was done. Up until that point, if you were a craftsperson, for instance, you made a shoe and you made the entire shoe. You might have had some people helping you, some apprentices, but you pretty much made the entire shoe, or you made an entire piece of furniture. And the Industrial Revolution unbundled work. It took what used to be a set of tasks. So as you said, my construct is what is work essentially, like at its most basic, is it's human skills applied to tasks to solve problems. That's sort of the sequence. And so we took all these tasks in the industrial era and we broke them apart. And we said, no, you're going to be on an assembly line, and all you're going to do is just polish the piece of furniture. You're just going to take the chair and you're going to polish it. And that's it. You're not going to do anything else, over and over again. And so by unbundling work, we then had people do certain tasks over and over again. And that was efficient, but it wasn't a lot of fun. It didn't create a lot of fun for work. So fast forward to the modern era, and technology is allowing us to unbundle work in a lot of different ways. It's allowing us to be able to take a completely different mindset as to how we use our human skills to perform tasks and solve problems. And especially in the post-COVID era, where we're using these technologies to communicate, what it does is it allows people to be able to completely rethink what a job is, what their own work is, the context that they like to perform their own work. And because for many people, not for all people, but for many people, that flexibility in the design of work is increasing. That means you have to have your own concept of what it is that does motivate you in your work. How do you want to do your work, and how will you build that sort of bundle of work? I often call that a portfolio of work for people that just don't have a single static job. They've got a variety of different projects that they do, and they've rebundled their work themselves.
In that article, basically at the source of this great transformation, that's technology. Specifically, you mentioned automation on one side, and on the other side, globalization. So basically, also all the effect that the internet brought to our economy and the way we work. Today, there's another great general purpose technology that is coming on our side, and it is, of course, AI. And what do you see that? How do you see that AI is changing the way we work? It's going to make this idea of unbundling even greater, even at a higher level, or
Absolutely. So first off, it's really important, I think, for your listeners to I want to make sure I'm sort of painting a picture as to what it is that automation technology always does, and then what's different about what we call artificial intelligence. So, what technology always does is a couple of things. The first is that if you buy that it's human skills applied to tasks to solve problems, technology automates tasks. When we used to, that one of the first technologies that really dramatically changed human work was the plow, the ox drawn plow. Humans used to have to till the ground by themselves, by their own strength. And then along comes this new technology that allows you to be able to plow a field much more efficiently and much faster. So the first thing that it does is it automates tasks. But then there is always a business model of the people who create and own that technology. And it took a lot to be able to buy an ox and to be able to buy a plow. And if you weren't a good business person, then you were going to be the one who was holding the plow behind the ox. You weren't going to be the one owning it. And so that's what happens over and over again is we have these technologies that unbundle work or that perform certain tasks. Some people end up owning the technologies and other people end up using the technologies, but the people who own the technologies always make more money. That just happens over and over again. So now we leap into the AI era, and suddenly there's a set of technologies. It's important for people to understand. There is no artificial intelligence. There's no such thing as artificial intelligence. It's a marketing label. It's just a bundle of technologies that we've kind of grouped together, and we call it AI or an AI, which is a mistake, I think, but we're sort of stuck with it. And what it really is a set of technologies that perform tasks in ways that seem sometimes magical to us, but can synthesize information from a lot of different sources. And the software changes its behavior based on the information that you give it. That was originally called machine learning. And now we have flavors of AI that, like large language models and so on, that can use huge amounts of data to change their behavior. So, what does that do to work? Well, we used to think we're really, really good and uniquely good at tasks that required creativity, at tasks that required pulling in a whole bunch of information and sort of synthesizing it and then coming up with some insights. And we are good at that. We're really, really good at that. But what artificial intelligence, especially large language models, and what people often are thinking about is sort of the category that ChatGPT and Claude is in. Those technologies are really good at a range of tasks related to information. Now, what is important is for people to realize, well, there's probably about 60% of jobs in Western economies like Italy that really don't use information all that much. A plumber doesn't really need to use computers that much. They have to have a website and they have to calculate, the bills for people and that sort of thing. But their job isn't deeply dependent upon a lot of these information technologies. But there's lots of other jobs like call center, answering the phone on call centers that do rely a lot on these technologies. And it turns out that these technologies, as they always are good at certain things and not at other. So if you have a very information intensive job, if your job was to be able to try to hear a question from somebody and give them an answer, technologies are pretty good at a lot of those things. And so that's one of the ways that technology always disrupts jobs is it automates these tasks. And if the tasks add up to a lot of the percentage that a job used to require, another human might decide, hey, that job goes away. And so this is a very, very important thing to take away in the era of AI is automation doesn't take jobs. AI isn't taking jobs. It just automates tasks. And then a human decides if the job goes away. Although increasingly some companies are using even AI to determine if a job goes away, and that's not great for humans. But it's very, very important to realize there's always a human in the loop that is deciding about whether or not jobs continue or whether people continue to have work.
Yeah, great. It reminds me about what Kevin Kelly wrote in The Inevitable.
Yeah.
Yes, speaking about human substitution by technology, it always
Yeah.
says follows the same path. So first it starts with technology and can never take my job, and then it goes through like it can take some parts but not the core. It's not just doing it exactly like me. I'm better. Then it evolves, and then finally we discover like it can take my job, but I have a new job that is extremely new, more exciting, more fun,
Yeah.
and it starts over. Basically it always repeats. So this is like, I
Yeah.
don't know if
So
you
I,
agree with this kind of vision.
yeah. So I had a marvelous lunch with Kevin at the TED conference years ago with Kevin Kelly, and we had a great discussion about this. And so my framing, this is the way I think about it, is if you talk to an economist, and I talk to a lot of economists. I'm not an economist, but I sometimes I'm asked to play one on TV. So this is all of the humans and the work that they can do. It's their human skills, the tasks they can perform. And this is all of the paid work. And if you think of that as a Venn diagram, like there's a bunch of overlap. And so there's always work that's going away. So you can think of that as the kinds of jobs there used to be a lot of, and then there's not as many. There used to be a lot of jobs for journalists, and now there's not as many. And then in the middle where they overlap, this is humans and the work, the paid work, where they overlap, those are the jobs that exist today. And then there's all these new jobs in the future. There's all this new demand, prompt engineers, and soon you're going to have AI agent designers. And so those are the new jobs that Kevin's talking about. So the old jobs go away, well, there's just fewer of them. There's still journalists, there just aren't as many. And I'm a recovering journalist. I used to be the editor of 6 different technology magazines. And then there's jobs that exist today and are often changing. And then there's new jobs that are being created. Now, the one element that it's really important to add to this is the pace and the scale of the change, right? So you're probably, lots of people, if you were in the transportation industry 200 years ago, that meant you worked with horses. Not a lot of people work with horses today. So those jobs are mostly gone. There's still a few. But if you worked with horses and then along comes this new technology called the car, and you couldn't make the adjustment, you couldn't take the skills that you used working on buggies and use them to be able to work on cars, you were out of a job. And so that is the pace of change. Is it's going to go from the old work to the new work. And if you can do it relatively quickly, you've got the new work. But if you haven't been trained for the new work, if you don't even know what the new work is, or if the new work is over there in another country, you may not be able to make that transition as easily. And so the speed with which that transition happens is really important, because if it's very fast, humans don't adapt that quickly. And the scale, so the pace and the scale, how many people is it affecting? That's what's different with technologies like AI. If I always say, if Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, if he had to mail CD-ROMs to everybody that wanted to use his program, it would have taken years. But in about 2 months after ChatGPT 3.5 was released, he had 2 million users, and now has about 200 million users. That could only happen because all these layers of technology, including the internet, allowed 200 million people to get access to his software. And so that's what we need to do as humans. We have to be able to deal with that pace and that scale of change. And the pace of it is only accelerating.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking about technology, of course, it has huge impacts not only on the way we work, but on the way our economy, our industries, the way we organize ourselves and our lives, and the way we work. And it brought some effects, like, for example, every year there's this new survey of Gallup, speaking about the biggest and greatest disengagement, disconnection between workers and organizations. It's increasingly harder to manage a distributed workforce. You wrote a couple of years ago, if I'm not wrong, a fantastic piece on your LinkedIn profile where you were analyzing this effect of transformation, and you were saying something like the only possible future for organization is community. Personally, I found extremely provocative and relevant. I ask you to briefly introduce this concept to ask you more questions later.
Yeah, absolutely. So first up, I just wanted to make sure that your listeners realize that. So I definitely want you to read those articles that are on Medium, and then a lot of those ideas I put into my book, The Next Rules of Work, and sort of put all the pieces together. So the book is probably the even the better format to be able to explore some of these ideas. But the basic premise that I was trying to help people understand is so many of us are going to be working for a good chunk of our lives. And many of us are going to do those in organizations. And so what's an organization? An organization is essentially some type of operating system or structure that two or more people can use to be able to create value for some stakeholder, right? So if you have a little bakery and there's only you and your assistant, then there's only two of you. Your organization is two people, and you create great pastries for your customers, right? So that's an organization, and you're creating value for somebody. Now, there are organizations that are 100,000 people, 300,000 people. And so they're basically the same approach. It's a structure that helps people to be able to create value for other people. How do we think about what that process of working with an organization is, and what are the ways that we as humans want to be able to channel our energies and do that in a modern organization? Well, if an organization is really, really good at understanding how to create value for its customers or other stakeholders, and it's really good at helping people to understand what their own skills are, and it's really good at helping them to be able to plug in, helping the humans to plug into the best place in the organization to do the work that they love to do, to be able to use their skills and perform the tasks they love to perform and create value for those stakeholders, then that's a great organization. However, in the modern world, and especially in the post-pandemic world, what ends up happening is we've unbundled some parts of the organization. We used to require in many, many industries that people go into an office 5 days a week and they're there 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. I know in some countries that's a little variable. It's not as much. There's a number of countries, for instance, that are experimenting with 4-day work weeks. There's a lot of organizations that have very, very distributed employees, as you were saying. What ends up happening is you can think of, again, the Venn diagram of you and the company you work for. How connected are you? How much do you feel like you are a member of that organization? And I don't know if any of your listeners are mathematicians, but there's a great way to think about that. Is that a Venn diagram, or any kind of typical approach to thinking of a set of something is called set theory, and it's either you're in it or you're not. You're either part of the organization or you're not. But if you think of it instead as what's often called fuzzy set theory, it's the degree of membership. So how much of a member of your organization do you feel? Do you feel really connected to the people you work with? Do you feel really connected to your work? Do you really feel connected to the work of the organization? And if the answer to all those is yes, I'm really, really connected, well, maybe you're 80 or 90 or even 100% a member of that organization in your mind. But what if you don't love your work? What if you don't love your boss? What if you don't love what the organization is doing? What if you don't feel really connected to the other workers in your organization? The survey company Gallup calls this engagement. I don't use the word engagement. I talk about membership. I talk about that degree of membership. And if you feel very disconnected and you're remote and you're really not, you don't talk to your coworkers all that much and you don't love that, you really want to be around people more, and well, then maybe your degree of membership is only 10 or 20%. Maybe you're not very connected to the organization. And so that's what people who run organizations are very, very worried about, and especially with young people nowadays. I often say I don't think that these younger people that are coming into the workforce are a new generation. I think they're a new species. I think they have often a very different mindset about meaning. So, how do you create the environment that you can encourage people to feel a stronger degree of membership? I call that community. So the whole idea of a community is that there's a bunch of different people and they all have different roles and they all generally agree on what they want. They all want to have a better life. They all want to have clean water and clean streets. They all want to have places to grow their children in a physical community. An organization is essentially a virtual community, whether it's all in an office or not. It's a community of people that all are committed to creating value for the organization stakeholders, and that's true whether it's a corporation or a government or an NGO. So community is about that social cohesion, the degree of membership and connectedness of people in an organization. And I believe in the past, many organizations left that almost to chance. They weren't thinking about trying to build better social cohesion among people in their organizations. And I'm an advisor, for instance, to a software company out of Brazil called Cosa, and we believe that we are creating software to help increase that social cohesion. And I believe that is the future of many organizations. You have to change your mindset if you're somebody who leads the organization, that you need to build that sense of community so that people, and especially young people, want to be able to continue to help with the work of your organization.
Probably I could ask like 100 questions about this topic, but I would stick with a couple of one.
Sure.
So my first question is, you said something in the past years, we lost this opportunity to create community. Probably one of the, you are mentioning this topic in your article, in your piece, one of the topic organization would have focused more in the past has been culture. And you're saying something like, instead of creating culture that sounds like an artificial creation, that's something that you say you are believing into, instead of focusing on culture, you should create community. So can you explain a little bit more what is the main difference between culture and why we should push a community instead of culture?
I want to make sure, again, I'm trying to help listeners just sort of get a what I often call a cosmology, like a set of pictures about how all these pieces work together, because they do. We're talking about often complicated concepts, and especially when we're thinking about organizations, because especially large organizations are big, complicated beasts. But a lot of the underpinnings of this is actually pretty simple. So one of the framing of my book, The Next Rules of Work, the subtitle is the mindset, skill set, and tool set to lead your organization through uncertainty. I call these the three legs of the stool of transformational change. So, mindset is the way that we as humans approach situations, approach each other. It's how we prepare and how it sort of guides our actions when we perform tasks. Skill set is the way we channel our human energies. And tool set are these technologies that we're talking about, like AI. Mindset is always the most important, because think about it. You've got two different people. One of them wakes up in the morning, leaps out of bed, is just aching to jump into their work, start interacting with their coworkers, just loves everything about what they're going to be doing for their work that day. That's a mindset. And then another person stays in bed, sleeps longer, doesn't really look forward to the day and their work, grudgingly does a few things for work, and then tries to avoid work as much as possible. That's a mindset. Each of those is a mindset. And so what happens with a lot of people who lead organizations is they think of culture as something that guides the behavior and values of humans. And what they want is a culture that they create often, that the people who lead organizations can create, so that they're telling people how to behave. And I say, well, I get that, but culture is a little fuzzy. it's squishy, and it's very subjective. And unfortunately, what happens in a lot of especially large organizations is that people lead tend to fall into the trap of wanting to control culture. They want to tell people, this is how you must behave. And what I believe is that we're entering into a new era, what I call the next era, where we're going to focus more on mindset. We're going to focus more on trying to create a community of people that all want to create value for the organization stakeholders and want to collaborate with each other to do that. But what I've found is that people who lead organizations need to do that as a team sport. If you think of a hierarchy, which is the way too many organizations run nowadays, they're in these pyramids. And the people at the top of the pyramid, they believe they can mandate what culture is. And they go off into a retreat and they come back and like bringing tablets from the mountain and they say, here's the culture of the organization. Here's the rules we're going to follow. And I think that's a failure. I think you have to do it as a team sport. I don't know if you know the history of hierarchies, but the first person to really use hierarchy in an organization was Alexander the Great. And he was the one who basically, he and his team, they came up with this whole idea that there's somebody at the top and they give orders to two and they give orders to two more and so on. That's been around for a long time. And these new technologies allow us to be able to have much more distributed organizations and much more flexible organizations and more team oriented organizations. But I believe that requires people who lead to double down on mindset. And what you want to do is you want to help people to have the mindset that they can continually increase the connections between themselves and their work, themselves and their teams, and themselves and the organization. And that has to be a deliberate process of creating community with a mindset of helping people to be able to help each other.
Great. Thank you. What do you think about the increasing emerging of the role of solopreneurs or
Yeah.
one-person businesses, or also enabled by the creator economy, the platforms, and the internet? So, Sam Altman is saying that we will see very soon the first unicorn company made by just one person. Would be the role of organizations in the future if we are going to see more and more companies made by just one person?
The era that we're entering into, one of the reasons I call my book The Next Rules of Work is that the rules just keep changing. So if we just do the new rules of work, you know what, that's fine. But the next rules, like it's what's coming, that we all need to have, be able to anticipate and hopefully to be able to even co-create. So if you think of certainly the post World War II organization, we often worked in the same company for a really long time. We often had the same job for a really long time. You were a lawyer, you were an engineer, you were a doctor, and you often worked for the same organization. Sometimes you had your own small business. Well, what ends up happening in every economy, especially in the West, but every economy, is that the new jobs, like the new employment that needs to be created for people, does not come from existing organizations. It comes from organizations that are 5 years older or less. So that means new organizations. So you need startups, you need new businesses, that's the way you're going to get new employment, especially if you have lots of babies or lots of immigrants. Now, the problem is that there's a lot of economies where the populations are not growing, and Italy is one of them, and so, or not growing very fast. And so you need new strategies. And one of the strategies you must have, if you're not going to get a lot of growth from a lot of new companies that grow to become big companies, you have to have a lot of individual entrepreneurs. Is you have to empower people to start new businesses, or at least to start new businesses on the side, so that you can bring new value into your economy. And if you don't do that, then you don't have a growing economy. What ends up happening is, if you think of an organization, it used to have very hard walls. You were either an employee or you weren't an employee. But now we're softening the walls of organizations. If you look at platforms like Upwork and Fiverr, if you look at the process that many organizations go through to try to create new products, to try to be able to into new markets. You have the opportunity to be able to leverage a variety of talent that used to only work in corporations and you had to hire them full time. Now there's an increasing amount of talent that is much more independent and is much more global. And they themselves, even if they're just working as a contractor, they're still solopreneurs. They're still doing work for others. They're still running a business. And what that gives us is a much more flexible economy. The problem is that your income and your access to work in many cases sort of goes up and down. If you have a job, it's nice and flat. You're in the black. And if you're a solopreneur, a lot of times it's you're making money and then you're not making as much money. So what we need to do is we need to create great entrepreneurs, whether or not they're running individual businesses or they're working in large organizations. So what does an entrepreneur do? An entrepreneur has, I think, four skills. They're they're very good at problem solving. They're very good at being adaptive. They're very good at being creative problem solving, and they're very good at empathy. They're good at understanding the problem of a customer. And in English, I call that PACE. Problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. And you can have that PACE skill set, whether you're a solopreneur or whether you are very entrepreneurial in your mindset inside an organization. So I believe what ends up happening is more and more organizations are going to encourage people who love solving problems and can keep on jumping into different teams to solve them. So whether you're in an organization or you're outside of an organization, you are still an entrepreneur. And if you have your own business, you're a solopreneur. And if you are part of a big organization, then you are much more entrepreneurial in your mindset because you're trying to continually solve new problems.
Great, and probably that brings us directly to our next question that is more related to all the people around that are looking for a job or seeking a career, different career path in their lives. I think your work builds a lot on the legacy of your father's work. Your father's work was the author of What Color is a Parachute, the book that changed the lives of millions of people all around the world in more than 50 years. And what excites me about this book and about the work of your father, your work too, is that for finding your dream job, you first need to know who you are, what motivates you, what's your real passion, where and how you can deliver more value to others. And especially in this year, I've been a couple of months ago at a European conference of HR leaders called Unleash in Paris. And everyone was speaking about skill-based organizations. So you could see tens of startups trying to solving the problem of skill validation. So okay, you are telling me you can do something, but are you really able to do that kind of thing? And what leaves me with a lot of questions is there are a lot of companies trying to understand what you can do, but no one is asking what do you want to do,
Yeah.
what really motivates you in your life. So
Yeah.
what those advice, I think they are true today more than ever. What do you think that is still relevant about those legacy, and what would be your advice to anyone that is seeking for a new job or a new career path?
No, absolutely. So thank you for honoring my father's work. My father was a recovering priest in San Francisco who ended up writing the world's career manual. So What Color is Your Parachute was translated in 17 languages, about 10 million copies that were sold. And he left behind an amazing legacy when he passed away a number of years ago. And we started a small software company with him called eParachute, where we tried to bring some of his work online. But my father's basic premise was very simple and straightforward. You can see where he gets some of this inspiration. So he said, look, if you're going to go change jobs, you're going to go change careers, there's really just three things that you need to figure out. And he called them what, where, and how. So the what is you. is what are your skills? What do you love doing? What motivates you in your work? Where can you use those skills? What are the different kinds of roles or contexts? Maybe it's working in a big company, and that's one role. Maybe it's starting your own business. Maybe it's working with several different businesses. Or so that's the where part. And then the how. Well, how are you going to get there? How are you going to find or create that job? What are the mechanics? Like, what are the steps you go through? And so, what, where, how? And as you say, it began with what? We call this self inventory. What are your skills? How do you know that you love those skills? How have you demonstrated those skills in the past? What do you want to learn? And then what are the other parts of a job that you also want to have work well for you? What kind of people do you want to work around? What kind of environment and working conditions do you want? Where do you want to work? And so on. So you start with that self inventory. And as you say, many organizations now are also trying to do that inventory and understand what is someone's skills. For the people who work for us, what skills do they have? Where could they use their skills best in the organization? And that's, again, a focus of the work that I'm doing with this company, Acaso. But for each of us as individuals, we want that answer because we want to understand our own skills. And then if we're job hunting or if we're thinking about or we're trying to get other work inside our same organization, some hiring manager is going to want validation. When you think of hiring is just one thing, it's reducing risk. That's all that it is. If you knew with absolute certainty that the next person to walk through the door was the perfect hire, you'd hire them. In the same way that as a job hunter, if you knew that the next organization you walked into was the perfect place for you to work, you'd accept any job offer. But we don't know those things. So instead, what's happening, and I actually was at the same Unleash conference, I was hosting the AI stage and lecturing myself. Yes, what I've been talking about with skills literally going back 40 years now is considered, very, very common for organizations to be trying to understand the skills of the people who work there. Here are the challenges. The first is that as humans, there's no Fitbit for skills. There's no technology that tells us, yes, here's all the not just congratulations, you did 10,000 steps today, but congratulations, you learned 3 new skills, and I've got them, all captured in data. There's no Fitbit for that. And so we have to have processes to be able to capture that. And then to reduce risk, a hiring manager wants to know, well, do you really have those skills? So that's the validation that you were talking about. There's a whole bunch of amazing innovation going on. We have my company Charette, we have an initiative called the Skills Genome Project, where we think we're going to crack the code on human skills the same way we've cracked the code on human DNA. But organizations are still wrestling with how do we make all this come together? If I understand somebody's skills and I have the validation, yes, you work there, you develop these skills at this school and so on. Well, then how do I make sure you get the right matchup? And then how does that hiring manager use that information about your skills to hire different kinds of people? In the past, we used these proxies called degrees, and we hired people often based on their degree. Well, if you're going to unbundle work, you might as well unbundle education as well. And that's one of the pieces that you referred to that I have on Medium. So the opportunity for organizations is to not just adopt these skills models, but to make them relevant in the design of work roles, which we used to call jobs, where we're defining the skills that are needed to be able to solve certain problems. And we don't worry quite as much in most industries about a particular degree or having a certain number of years of experience. We just want to know that that person can solve those problems effectively in that work.
Great. Can you tell me just a quick comment about the CV, the curriculum vitae, the tool we
Yeah.
use to present ourselves? That it's true that tools often are not just a way to present ourselves in the case of the curriculum vitae, but it's also a tool to shape our path towards work. We choose a degree, a school, a few experience just for pimping up our CV. Okay, so what do you think? It's still relevant in today's economy, in the way we work, or we need better tools?
What was the way we used to hire people like way, way back, when we were still, using horses and carriages and that sort of thing? Is you'd walk up to a business and you'd say, I'm looking for work. And they'd say, what can you do? And you would tell them what you think your skills are. And then they would say, well, who can vouch for you? Like, is there somebody you worked for before who would say you did that work? Or, that's one way. But often what we do is say, okay, you say that you are a woodworker. Make me a chair. Go ahead. Here's the wood. Make me a chair. Show me what you can do. And so what I believe, and then the information about what you did, that has to get captured somewhere. Well, in the past, it was just referrals. Like it was just people who would validate that you were there. And then along comes this thing called the resume or the CV, the curriculum vitae. And my father used to call that people in the form of paper because they used to be on paper. That's it. There weren't nobody had a computer. So it was you, and it was a narrative. It was a story about you. And often it was in a reverse chronological order, and it told the story of what you did at different points. And all that was a validator saying, yes, I have these skills, I've demonstrated them in these environments. And the brands, especially if I worked at a well-known company or I went to a well-known university, those brands, when somebody would scan your vitae, those would reduce risk. Like, oh, you went to Harvard and you worked at IBM, and oh, absolutely, I'll hire you. Oh, you went to a school I've never heard of and you worked at companies I've never heard of. Well, I don't know if I'm going to hire you. I mean, I can't tell. And so what ends up happening over time is people have changed the rules a little bit as to how that information gets captured and what that narrative is. And so we still have resumes, but they're really imperfect. They're just a narrative, just a story, and it has words in the story. And what many employers have done is they've put employment systems in place, and they're called CMSs, candidate management systems. And what they're looking for is those keywords. They're trying to say which words did that person use? Did Matteo? Oh, Matteo used the word problem solving, or he used the word engineering, or okay, great, it passes this filter, and then it's going to get into another bin of resumes I might actually read if I'm a human. So what's happened is it's an arms race where the descriptions of what we've done in the past are imperfectly captured in a piece of paper. What is likely to happen, and you were talking about skills models for organizations, is that eventually many, many people on the planet will have what's known as a skills wallet. That is, there will be, in the same way you've got a LinkedIn profile, there will be a repository. There'll be a place that the information about what you've done in the past will be stored, and it will be following a standard format and standard protocols where, oh, did you actually go to Harvard? I can ask your skills wallet and it will verify it. Did you actually work at IBM? Oh, it'll verify that as well. And so we'll shift more to this digital model. Good news. You went to Harvard and IBM, you're probably going to get hired. Bad news. You went to places people don't really give as much credibility to. You can still get filtered out just like you did before. And especially for those with less access and less advantage, they'll get filtered out even more. And so what we need is where the skills jump out, and I can ask, can Matteo actually solve this problem? Whether he went to Harvard or worked at IBM or not. Oh, he's proven over and over again he has this skill. He can solve this problem. He's amazing at furniture creation. Great. I don't need to know where he went to school or what companies he was at. He has proven that he can use this, they can demonstrate this skill over and over again, and his skills wallet affirms it. And I will use that trust to hire him.
Thank you very much. So we spoke about a lot of different topics. We started with the definition of the word and the meaning of work. We went through the great unbundling of work. We spoke about the effect of the impact of AI on the way we work. We spoke about the new phase of organizations as communities, and we also spoke about new professional and personal path to find new careers or to seek job in different ways. Work after our podcast and newsletters always ends with the same questions. If you have to give a couple of practical advice, both to who works, who is seeking for a new job or for a change in his career, or a student maybe, and to organizational leaders to prepare for the future work. What that advice would be?
Let's start with the personal, and then that'll give some thoughts for the people who lead organizations. So for individuals, what I believe is critical in the age of AI, and whether or not AI has these technologies have any impact on your work or not, the pace and the scale of change is only going to get faster and bigger. That is, we're going to see more and more technologies going to have a bigger and bigger impact on work, and that creates tremendous new opportunity, as you said. Kevin was talking about, Kevin Kelly. But what helps you as an individual to continually go through that adaptation process? Well, I believe it starts with mindset. And the mindset that I encourage is to have a North Star or a Southern Cross. When people used to fly the oceans and they didn't have GPS, how did they get from point A to point B? Well, they followed the stars. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, you follow the North Star. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, you follow the Southern Cross. But basically, it's something directionally pulls you forward. It doesn't tell me exactly where I'm going, but it's something that I'm passionate about. I'm going in this direction. And I encourage every human, especially in the age of AI, to have a North Star or Southern Cross, something that motivates you in your work. It could be a problem you want to solve. It could be some type of value you want to bring in the world. It could be kinds of people that you most want to help. It could be the planet. Whatever it is that draws you forward, that pulls you forward, you need that North Star or Southern Cross. You need something that you continually feel gives you that next opportunity, or makes you curious or passionate about that next opportunity. So that's a mindset. For those who lead organizations, you might have noticed that I never once in our conversation used the word leadership. I believe that there's countless books every year on leadership, and it's the reason there's always new people trying to come up with new language for it is because it's really hard. It's hard to lead. So I say leading is a verb. And so for people who lead organizations, I think especially if you have this mindset around community, we're going to need a completely new skill set and mindset around leading. And I called that the team guide. My friend Esther Wojcicki has a book called Moonshots in Education. And she says the teacher needs to go from the sage on the stage, the one with all the answers, to the guide on the side, the one with the best questions. And I believe the same thing is true for people who lead organizations, is rather than being a leader or a manager, you are a guide. You are the guide of teams. You are the guide of teams of teams. What you are trying to do is understand what is the skill set of the people that I have in my organization? What is the mindset that I have in the organization? What's the tool set that I can provide them so that they can create the most value? And if I see that as continually committing to trying to uncover the skills, to be able to develop the mindset of the people in the organization, what I will do is I will empower them to solve problems. And I think in the old way, people who lead organizations, they used to judge themselves by how many problems they solved. And I think the way they will judge themselves in the future is by how many problems never reach their desk, because the people they work with solved the problems before the person who leads ever saw them. So I think that's a mindset shift in both cases. For the individual, the shift towards having that North Star or Southern Cross, and for the person who leads in an organization. And anybody can lead in an organization, not just the person at the top of the Alexander the Great hierarchy. Anybody can lead in an organization. And so by shifting to this mindset of the team guide, you are about empowerment, and you are about encouraging others to be able to become the best problem solvers they can be.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for the great advice. Thanks for your time. And I strongly recommend to all our listeners to go check out the work of Gary Bolles, his book, The Next Rules of Work, and of course his LinkedIn profile, where he writes a fantastic newsletter. Also, you have a couple of great courses on LinkedIn to prepare for the future of work. So thanks again. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time, always on Work After. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks so much. But ciao.